Hello, my name's Holly and welcome to Forward Meet the Poet with Will Harris in conversation with Alexandra Harris, who is no relation. I can see our participants coming in, but we're going to wait a few minutes so everyone can arrive and settle down. Now, if you haven't done a Zoom webinar before, I'll just direct you to the chat. If you put your cursor over the main image, you'll see some icons appear underneath, and one of them is a little chat speech bubble. If you click on that, you'll see the chat on the right-hand side, and I've put some links in there which you can look at later after the event is over, but you can also put questions in there or just say hello and introduce yourselves while we're waiting for everyone to arrive here. We're just seeing those numbers steadily coming in. Fantastic, I think we'll kick off. So tonight, we will be hearing from Will Harris, and he's reading from his Forward Best First Collection shortlisted RENDANG. This event will take about 45 minutes. So he'll be reading some of his poems. Some of them will be set to video pieces he's created. And he'll also be answering questions put to him by our Chair of Judges, Alexandra Harris. Now, Alexandra is a writer, teacher, literary critic, and cultural historian. Her works include The Romantic Moderns, Weatherlands, Writers and Artists Under English Skies, Time and Place, and many books, paintings, peoples, and places. So many essays on books, paintings, people, and places. She is currently working on a study of rural history and local feeling. She reviews for The Guardian and has presented a range of arts programmes for the BBC and radio. She is a professor of English at the University of Birmingham and a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. And I'm pleased to welcome Alex. Alex, if you unmute yourself and say hello. There you are. Alex, we should be able to hear you now. I'm not sure why we can't. Could you say something?
Yay!
Oh, so sorry, Alex.
Thank you, Holly.
Here.
Okay, brilliant. That's the only glitch we're going to have. It's going to be perfect. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm so glad to have this chance of talking with Will Harris this evening about this extraordinarily full and finely achieved collection, RENDANG. I have to confess that if you're reading 200 books of poetry as a judge, just one or two of them blur a little bit. But with RENDANG, I so vividly remember where I was when I read it. It's one of those. The room just filled with ideas, colours, signs, people signalling to each other across distances, con men, tricks, puzzles, leaps, movement, so many allusions and echoes. And these strange, tense gaps and silences, like areas of blue sky in which you just have to step and trust Will to take you somewhere. In the poem Say, we hear flow, break, flow. And that's an idea that comes back and back through the collection, flowing like waves through it. Say was shortlisted for the 2018 Forward Prize for the Best Single Poem. So Will already has been much involved with the Forward Foundation, and it's fantastic to welcome him back with this first collection. I know many of you will have been following his work for some time, admiring his first pamphlet, All This Is Implied, and also his book-length essay, Mixed Race Superman. The format over the next 40 minutes or so, is just slightly different from the last two, in that we've got a little bit more of a performance element, no less. First of all, we'll hear the first poems and have a bit of normal conversation. And then there's going to be a really good 10-minute chunk in the middle, where we're going to hear the full final sequence of the collection, Rendang, with some audio and visual experimentation. Will is in technological mood, and it's going to be great. And then not long afterwards, there'll be another filmic episode involving silent movies, arm-waving policemen, and The Tempest. Will is deeply interested in how we think in pictures, write in pictures, interpret each other's mimed signs. So I think there's much to look forward to in what we've got ahead. We've had some questions in advance, but if you'd like to put some in the chat, I will endeavour to bring them in and keep an eye on what's going on there. But for now, can I welcome Will to give us his first reading, which I believe is going to be the first poem in the book, In West Sumatra. Hello, Will.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for the generous introduction, and thank you everyone who's here. I'm going to read the first poem in the book, which is also kind of a dedication. I guess it's the place where a dedication would be. In West Sumatra they call Rendang, Randang. Neither shares a root with Rending. Rose and Rose have French and Frisian roots you can't hear. Context makes the difference clear. Here lies one whose name was writ in Bahasa. Here are words I've said in memory of her who I could never speak to. Chandrasari, I call you wrongly. Rend me rightly, rootless and unclear.
Thank you so much. That doubling of elegy and dedication, and also beginning of opening out from there is I think really beautiful. It's sort of laboratory and yet has all this energy and sets out what you're going to do across the whole book. I think especially in terms of language, that word Bahasa you've got there, whose name was writ in Bahasa, not in water but in Indonesian language. Yeah. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the kind of relationship with language that you set out in that poem.
Yeah, because technically that does just mean language. As my mom would say and correct me, Bahasa means nothing by itself. It would just be like saying, I speak language. You know,
okay.
What does that mean? It means it's only Indonesian if you say Bahasa Indonesia, and obviously there are other regional variants like Bahasa Malay. So it's like, it's almost consciously nonsensical. You know, here lies one whose name was written in Bahasa, or even just kind of self-evident, tautological, here lies one whose name was written in language. It's a kind of like meaningless sentiment, but it's kind of meant to chime with that rendang, randang thing, the kind of like almost nonsense connections of rendang, randang, rending. Because sometimes it kind of mimics my own relationship culturally to the Indonesia of my mum's birth, which is almost this kind of like surface thing, almost like a kind of like clear screen where I can like see it. But when I try and touch it, I just like butt my head against it.
I really like your insistence that not everything is related, that you can't make these connections between rendang and rending by alluding to some kind of remote etymology that will magically join all this up. You know, you're keeping the ruptures in there.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with moments of like almost connection. Like originally that was part of a much longer kind of interview poem, and which was me being interviewed about my first collection, which at this point was only jokingly called Rendang. And then at the end of it, I had this little moment where which is kind of links to that, which I wish I could have involved in some way, where I asked what my grandma's favorite food was, and my aunt tells me, I mean, she did tell me that it's spaghetti bolognese, and that's the kind of like pathetic moment which it ends, which I feel like is also I kind of think of when I read that poem sometimes, like my grandma eating spaghetti bolognese in Indonesia, which is just wrong on so many levels.
I love it. So is there a relic of the joke still there in the way you use your title?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it is still a joke. Well, it's kind of like, I mean, I say joke. I mean, it's like a serious joke. I think I obsess over reception. I guess probably as any person of colour does, you're always trained not just to talk, but to think about how your words will be received, how you'll be seen as you say those words. And so with a book, especially with the first book, I was just probably too preoccupied with how people were going to read those poems before I'd even written them, in a sense. And so I thought one way to allay that was to, in capital, bold letters, call it Rendang. And I guess I was thinking of, Vani Capodeo's poem about mangoes. I open the book and a mango falls out. To have this book, which is literally Rendang, which is a type of Southeast Asian curry, if you don't know, and just which is the cultural signifier of Indonesianness.
So we get the curry on the title page. That you preempted us. We've now had our curry, and you can get on with doing other things that you actually want to do.
Yeah, well, and hopefully it slightly reorients your relationship to language, because the title is followed by this initial concrete poem. So it's playing on your initial idea of what you might expect, which is a book of kind of child of first generation immigrant about their cultural inheritance, Indonesia, whatever, divided cultures, yada yada. And then you get this list of words.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of it's kind of like shifting, the kind of like when you go to an optician's and they put different lenses in front of it. That's kind of the effect I wanted it to have. That suddenly you see that, but then you see these other words and you think rendition, rendable, render. And suddenly you're seeing what I take to be a more true experience of culture, which is culture mediated through language, mediated through words, through surface. And that's kind of the relationship I have to language in a lot of the poems, which is this kind of like slantwise thing, and also through to culture, which is culture mediated through language.
I think we can make a very interesting route through from you're talking about inheritance to the next poem you're going to read, which I think is Half Got Out.
Yes.
Over to you.
Great. I'm gonna read it on the screen. I got used to reading a PDF on my screen rather than a book. Do you know what I'm going to do when I have to see people in real life? I might just carry my laptop with me. Half Got Out. I was reading a poem by Ben Jonson, where a newborn, half got out, sees the city burning and decides to crawl back into his mother's womb. Thine urn, he calls it. It was Tuesday morning. I'd just seen Leo near Leicester Square. He was reading a book by W.S. Merwin, a poet himself newly returned to his dead mother's womb. I was feeling so anxious, Leo said, kind of low. When I started to read him, it felt like I found him at just the right time. I'm not sure, but don't parents always talk about their kids arriving at just the right time? Like you might describe finding your flip-flops just before a beach holiday. Yes, I said to Leo, he wrote that poem, didn't he? The sad dad one that starts, my friend says, I was not a good son, you understand? I say, yes, I understand. He says, I did not go to see my parents very often, and I say, yes, I know. I love the way the dialogue loops back in on itself, the way the poet is really talking to or about themselves. It hurts to read it. It reminds me I could be seeing my parents right now who live 10 stops away. Yes, half an hour, but I'm not. And what else am I not doing? You have to work though. You have to make a living, don't you? That may be true, I don't know. I left the library in light rain to meet Sophie for a drink at the Chandos. And she told me her granddad used to go to Richmond Park to fish. He was a wireless operating sergeant during the war. It's not like she cares, it's just funny, Even if she had a Victoria Cross taped to her forehead, it wouldn't stop those dickheads at the bar from asking if she's Latina or something. I just fucking hate this city. You understand? I say, yes, I understand, but I don't know how to leave it. I say, yes, I know, sorry, I don't know. I don't know how to leave or where I'd even go. I looped back to enter the tube at Leicester Square, stepping over the body of a homeless man to travel further again from my mother's womb to Turnpike Lane, the word interred echoing in my head. How many acres of earth were there above me then? The whole city might have been burning. I could already have been dead. There's no going back, my dad said. But how many times have I crossed the point of no return only to crawl back down King Street or Goldhawk Road to eat chicken noodle soup and talk about seat cushions from Lidl? Yes, I know they're good value. Thank you for dinner. Thank you. Half got out and half enwombed. I know that's just the way it is. I understand the tube threading me like a complex stitch beneath and through the city, back to the house we've been sharing lately. When I got in, I said, I'm home, and you said, yes, I know. And then you filled the kettle and sat down next to me and said.
And so we brilliantly lead right back into the beginning of the poem. It's so brilliantly structured. And yet, hearing you read it, one feels how fun and conversational your poems are at the same time as being so sharp and tight. I love the movement from encounter, horror, doubling back, and you echo that through and through the poem. It's so comical and sad at once. And you've clearly taken it from, you've taken your starting point from reading Ben Jonson's Pindaric Ode from the 1630s to the immortal memory and friendship of Carey and Morrison. I don't for a moment suggest we're going to have a long conversation about your relationship to Ben Jonson, but I have had a slightly more general question from one of your readers out there, Will May. Hello, Will. And it's about reading, so it seems opportune. And he says, a number of your poems have a speaker reading a poem. Is that how poems start for you?
Yes, it normally is. Yeah, and I think it was really liberating for me when I realized that I could just start with that. I think, you know, when you go to school in this country and you're given, I don't know, poems by Ted Hughes or even Philip Larkin, they're all poems which seem like little short stories or vignettes based on actual direct experience. And obviously Ted Hughes wrote this really influential book about how to teach poetry in schools, which is all about working with the senses, you know, and which is basically how poetry is still taught. And for me, poetry doesn't begin with my senses. Well, not obviously, it begins with words, which don't respond to the senses in the obvious way. It's like it's something which happens in your brain. It's the kind of like firing off of connections, that those like synaptic leaps. And that's what gets me excited and interested and that's where I start writing. And that leads into a different kind of poem, I guess, which is less sensory, but enables you to make kind of historical and emotional leaps, which are the kind which I'm more interested in. So yeah, I write, I don't lead a particularly interesting life. I can't really pretend I do. I mainly spend a lot of my time walking around, reading and talking about things I read and thinking about those things. And that's kind of where so I do.
all adventure is in the life of books. We need no more. I mean, to me, I would recommend it to anybody interested in the very act of reading, because you're so interested in how far we take on other people's voices. And all through the poem, you've got 4 people in that poem whose voices start to overlap. And even if you read it, they started to elide. And of course, your voice is eliding with Jonson and with W.S. Moen. So is that taking on of voices part of reading for you?
Well, the one thing, not to go back to talk about Jonson too much, but I discovered that Jonson poem in a book called The Poet's Freedom by Susan Stewart, which is an amazing book, and it's a chapter on praising, so on the ode. And then she lists that as the first example in English of the Pindaric Ode. And so that's kind of where it came, and it's also structured in this amazing way, like as with the Pindaric Ode around turn and counter turn. And so to me, this is a kind of praise poem about communality, and that's why it ends on said, because to me that is the point at which the reader comes in almost. Or to me, it's a gesture of openness, or where the speaker returns home and it's where someone else starts speaking. The kind of like gauntlet is passed, which to me is how I sometimes imagine when I finish reading what I feel like when I finish reading a really great poem, like I feel like it has somehow been passed to me. I haven't just witnessed a performance that I've been in an abject relationship to. Some kind of like force has been passed to me, the kind of like, you know, the gift of speaking, of saying, of thinking. To me,
I'm so happy, you know, because I think I read it in a slightly more closed circle than that. And actually, now I'm thinking about it again, that opening out to intervention for the reader is so,
the person
so much better.
who I wrote it for also thought that at first. Before I explained to her that it was meant to be a gesture of openness. It was her voice coming in, the poet, shutting up. Yeah.
The openness received over here. Well, I feel it's time for the big Rendang moment.
Okay.
In which case, I shall leave you to introduce what you're about to do, and this is going to be a fairly sort of concentrated 10 minutes or so of the last sequence in the book.
Yes, and hopefully this will work. I am not very technologically adept. I probably shouldn't say that, but it'll be obvious in a second. Okay, so this is the last poem in the book, also called RENDANG. Yatu tells me that last night he was in Stamford Hill and let himself be led into a stranger's kitchen. An old man wanted him to turn on his heating. He found the switch set above the counter by a bowl of fruit, almost hidden, and though it was past midnight, he could hear the sounds of children playing in the hall. How scary it is. That moment before sleep takes hold. I used to put a circle of soft toys around my head to see me through. My echidna's small beak pointed like a spear, and even then, when I heard the rustle of waterproof trousers, footsteps outside, a bag being packed and readied, I was scared. It's me, just me. I ask if the man seemed grateful. No, says Yatu. It was just like it was the most normal thing for him to do. One summer, aged 20, I was in Chicago looking for the flat of someone called Haley, who had offered me a couch for the night. Lost on West Division Street, I saw a service station painted with a mural, a Puerto Rican couple arm in arm, staring up at the two-pronged tip of the Sears Tower. Bicycles circled the cantina opposite, kids screaming at each other from behind their handlebars, looking like they passed between themselves a cup. Not like a trophy, more a kind of chalice, because they seemed to be going through the motions of waiting and wanting to put to their lips the brim of a cup or trying to grab at one, and none of them, not one, noticed the Sears Tower, which I now realized was directly in front of us, the real thing, its hulking bullhorns framed by two high tenements, their shoulders turned and hunched. Laughing, they pressed to their lips the brim of an invisible cup. Haley's place was virtually empty, a pile of clothes, a postcard of HD, a framed copy of the Velvet Underground and Nico. I curled up on the floor and slept. Slam! Flash of red and blue. Hey there! Hello, hello! Have you seen what's going on outside? Haley was standing by the door. She peeked through the blinds, clicked them shut, then slid her hand behind the fridge. A strip light flickered on. I craned my neck above the sill, enough to see or think I could, an oily substance. Drops leading from the curbside to a body, white sneakers. Haley wanted to cook, so made us scrambled eggs with onion and cumin seeds. Tex-Mex, she said. Served on the underside of a pink frisbee. No plates. We listened to music, sirens screeching behind us. Her new favourite thing was dubstep. Wait, didn't you say you were from London or something? As soon as Yatu said, bowl of fruit, I pictured the banana on the front cover of the Velvet Underground LP. The strip light flickered. Yatu and Haley fused. There was the openness with which he walked into that old man's home the same way Haley opened hers to me, a stranger. And there was another, more important aspect to his openness, like Haley's, unexpectant, the lack or need of gratitude. Yatu talks about his mum and I talk about mine, neither of whom were born in this country. I mentioned the bedsit in Cricklewood where my parents lived, how my mum squeezed all her belongings into its one wardrobe, stuffing the rest under the bed, adopting my dad's strict diet of spam and eggs. Younger than I am now, she put an electric kettle on the hob and nearly set the house ablaze. Fire! 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 Her whole life like that plastic handle burnt out of shape. Yatu's mum describes her life in Sri Lanka as a thread on which various events were strung that she could recall at will. But then she came to London and the cord snapped. Her life became a single point, all of its moments converging on one spot again and again. Early mornings some nights, my circle of soft toys close around my head, I'd hear my dad carry his bags to the scooter. I wanted morning, but I feared to sleep. The contractions went on for so long, Mum says. He left the hospital to look in at an antiques fair, but was back in time to hold her hand as she shook and swore, praying it would stop. Some mornings I wake up early enough that it's still dark, and I can imagine myself unborn. I lay the pages of this book around me. I talk to them. Rendang, I whisper. Rendang. No, they respond. No, no. Haley wanted to take us to a mezcal bar called Papa Reis. As she closed the gate, paramedics were lifting a man onto a stretcher. A cordon had been set up. A blonde man wearing headphones walked past. Hey, Brooks! Haley, long time no see. I thought you'd headed to Humboldt. That's next semester. Things are pretty crazy. You know what's been happening here? But what about you? Not much, what with schoolwork and Labor Day coming up. Hey, you want to come to Papa Reis with us? Just then, the man I thought I was looking at looked up at me, and he wasn't a man as such, but a boy, one of the boys I'd seen joking and shouting outside the cantina, one of his eyes now swollen shut. I looked at him, and he looked up at me and mouthed, "Fuck off." Well, that's what I say, he said. I must have been too far away to see, but it feels true, so when I tell this story, I add that "fuck off." I don't know what I saw. A stretcher borne calmly onto an ambulance, the white sill behind which my head dipped, the dark leaves of American elms along a street quiet as it is outside the pub where Yatu and I are talking about ourselves, here, now. Yatu says he went by Church Street to find a gift for Mother's Day. He went into 5 shops and couldn't find a single non-white person or anything his mum would like. It was all so dainty. I tell him that recently, strangers have been coming up to me on the street. Yesterday, for example, a man in Shepherd's Bush asked me about the fire. The fire? Yes. Is it near? Grenfell? Yes! I don't know, 15 minutes? I described the route, and as I did, he smiled. Not in an evil way, the opposite, like someone on a pilgrimage. And I watched him walk down Goldhawk Road, bagless and alone, carried aloft by what I assumed was some faith in suffering observed as healing. I thought about how I used to hate going to Jakarta, being implicated in the spectacle of hurt. I couldn't bear to look at it, to talk or think about it. So I covered it in silence. I cordoned it off. Tonight, I think of nothing empty, and life not sound or fury hit out to a random beat, but silence mainly. Silence that accrues weight, that takes up space and yet contains it. In this memory's invented I, I'm a child sitting in the corner of my dad's old stall, now a Gale's in Portobello. An open, unlit room, dawn outside, overcast. Don't worry, she says, he's getting tea. A dozen antiques dealers crowd around a tray of green ceramic ducks. They hold them close enough to check for imperfections, cracks. They look with such care these might be the new forms their past selves took on overnight. Their attention, an act of kindness to the past. I wake up early enough that it's still dark, and I can imagine myself unborn. Yatu and Haley are talking somewhere, breaking apart the silence in me. In Stamford Hill and Shepherd's Bush, those strangers' faces beckon mutely. I hear the sounds of children playing in the hall, the far-off screech of fruit flies. See my circle of soft toys, that bowl of fruit and postcard of HD, strip light and stretcher tin of spam. I walk half waking through my wakeless days. Rendang, I whisper. Rendang. I lay the pages of this book around me. I talk to them. No, they respond. No, no. Okay.
Thank you. God, that was extraordinary. Wow. It brought so much more to it, seeing it in those shapes.
I hope so. I hope it brought something to it.
It definitely did. It definitely did.
A lot of
I've got so much to ask about. But while we've got those last words in our minds, the pages laid out around you, and I was listening for the tone with which you'd read the pages almost talking back to you. I talk to them, no, they respond, no, no. I'm very intrigued by this conversation between you and your pages, and this image, I suppose, of the scattered sheets. It's as if, we're trying to tear the spine off this book, and it's all laid out again for us, and it could go into any order. Can you say a little bit about, either in relation just to that sequence or even to the book as a whole, how you even begin with laying out the pages of your books and bringing the poems into each other's orbits, as it were? You've got so many disparate elements in there, and you have to make them talk to each other across gaps. Can you talk a bit about that?
Wow, thank you. There's so much in that question. Thank you. Particularly, I really like that you picked up on what tone the pages might be using. I realize it could seem very, you could read in lots of ways, but in my head, they're quite disdainful. The tone is like, no, why would you even ask? What do you even, what do you want from me? I'm a page. I can't give you anything more. So it's not like a kind of prophetic no. It's just like no, because the pages of this book are kind of they're metaphorical pages. I actually kind of ironically didn't lay out the pages of this book to write it. I wrote it almost entirely on the computer to save paper, and also I know it's a thing that a lot of writers do, and then post photos of online. All their pages laid out around them, like in that meme of the guy with the the kind of post-it notes on the board. Like, I'm like, but for me, I didn't actually feel the need to do that. I just was happy to do it. But the pages, the significance of that is, I guess I love the idea. I like the idea of it kind of breaking down finally, and which is what it's like when you have a book. It both takes on a kind of like wholeness, which is separate to it, and also just feels entirely granular and like it could wash away or like recombine in a million different forms. But again, it comes back to this idea of surface, this idea of looking at these pages and saying, what are you, what question have I been asking of you as a book? What am I trying to, and ultimately they can't answer. The book, the writing, the act of writing it's not a way of answering the question, it's a way of asking. And ultimately the thing you get, or the thing that I get from writing, is that it's a gesture of refusal. It's not, I don't get from writing a kind of solution or an affirmation. I get from it a way of reorienting my relationship to language, my relationship to society, which is based on, on refusal, but not on a kind of like solution or answer. And that's also the kind of point of the ending. I guess it's also almost a bequeathing of the book to the reader as well. It's kind of it's a kind of, again, it's like meant to be a kind of more generous gesture than it seems in that, because that poem, every time I read it or think about it, is about shame and silence and the things that are cordoned off, the things that you refuse to acknowledge.
Yeah,
go on, sorry.
Well, no, only that there's a question from Claire Scott, who is also saying some marvellous things in the chat. And thank you, Claire, who's enjoyed your reading very much. And she's asking, you know, the pretty big question that is clearly much in your mind. What do you think is the role of poetry in contemporary society? And actually, you were verging on it just then.
Okay. Yeah.
So I wondered if you'd like to address that small item.
Well, the role of poetry, I think Jack Spicer is someone who's really good on the relationship of politics to poetry, and he always said that no political poem was worth as much as a letter to your congressman, or in our case, your MP. And obviously a letter to your MP or congressman is not worth very much, as anyone who's done that will know, in terms of causing actual political change. But I think one thing but I guess that was more about society. She's asking more about society and politics. But what I often think is that the writing of poetry is not in itself a radical act. It's not a political act. And it's important in my mind to separate political acts and social critique from poetry. Though poetry itself, which doesn't have the convictions of the political and social convictions of the poet entirely enmeshed within it, is kind of worthless to me. So that's kind of my quite complicated, or maybe not even nonsensical answer.
No, thank you so much. A generous and brilliant answer. And I mean, I just think that the way you relate apparently unrelated scenes and people is so inherently political, and all of these gestures of openness that you keep showing us feel very powerful in that way to me. But time is going too fast, and I feel we need to look towards Shooter's Hill.
Yeah, I feel like
we've got a whole extra bit of theatre coming.
Well, we're not going to
get that. So I'm going to hand over to Will for his poem From the Other Side of Shooter's Hill.
Okay. So what did I have? I kind of had planned a... Oh, wait a second, sorry. Let me just do that again. I kind of had planned a little... digression on early silent cinema, but I feel like we're running out of time, so I'm just going to show you a very brief clip, because this poem I almost never read because it references a few very particular silent films, which I love, including especially this early version of The Tempest. So this is Prospero and Actually, I realised you probably couldn't hear what I was saying over that. Or, in any case, we don't have time to watch all of it. It's really great.
Why don't you read the poem and then we'll talk a bit about what the movies mean to you, maybe.
Okay, I'll read the poems. Okay, but oh yeah, one short thing is that if you don't know who the Keystone Cops are, they're these...
Later, in a little village called Hollywood, the camera captured the antics that put a laugh on the face.
Those are the Keystone Cops. Not a lot of people know. Yeah, they were big in the early 20th century. Incompetent cops. So, this is called From the Other Side of Shooter's Hill. From the other side of Shooter's Hill, you saw an ambulance speed past a row of stationary cars. Though at a distance, you couldn't hear the siren, and it looked to be moving slowly, like a police car in a silent film, driving slowly so as to appear at a normal speed in playback. And you thought you saw the Keystone Cops crowded into a single car, chugging along the road to your little niece's birthday party, where they would fall over themselves in a heap at her doorstep, and you started crying. And when you arrived at my flat, you told me about the ambulance and the Keystone Cops and started crying again. I did too. And I asked if everything was okay. Yes, everything's okay, you said, suddenly embarrassed. But wait, why am I telling you this? Don't you dare think about using me in a poem, making me into some sad female cipher, my life a series of symbolic events, the ambulance representing mortality, my niece, I don't know, a hysterical desire for kids. Hey, I said. What about the Keystone Cops? How do they fit in? If I say this in a poem, it isn't to defer responsibility, but because I reject the possibility of narrating any life other than my own and need a voice capacious enough to be both me and not me, while always clearly being me. Fine, you said, pouring us a cup of black tea. Once, I said, changing tack, I was given a pellet gun for my birthday, and without my knowing, a friend started aiming it at passers-by, or he claimed at pigeons, until a neighbour called the police. In his defence, he asked how anyone could mistake the puck of a pellet gun for that of a real gun. He sounds like a real jerk, you said, starting to relax, to laugh. You told me about a recent dream in which you were trapped in a silent film, your every movement seen as slapstick, no one able to hear you scream. Maybe we should watch some Percy Stowe, I said, and put on How to Stop a Motor Car, a minute-long silent film featuring a car that slices a policeman in two before bouncing off another man's butt. Hilarious, right? But it's Stowe's 1908 version of The Tempest that's his masterpiece. He has Ariel, freed from the bole of an oak tree, do a curtsy. She's just a child. And scare off Caliban by turning into a monkey. How great is that? But the cast, you said, who are they? A bunch of Edwardian amateur actors and enthusiasts. The girl who plays Ariel might even have been the daughter of one. She must be dead, you said. Obviously, I replied. But by this stage in the evening, I was tired, my lips moving slowly, and though I could see you were in distress, it was like the ambulance you saw moving slowly, silently across the other side of Shooter's Hill. I do want children, you said, but not yet, not in this world. In playback, I knew, not only would we appear to be talking comically fast, but it would be impossible to tell who was speaking.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you must tell us a little bit then about this process of almost ekphrastic writing of yours, this movement from the idea of moving images into the movement of language.
Yeah, I was really obsessed with ekphrastic. Well, I think, so when I was a teenager, when I started first getting into poems, one of the first poets I loved were the New York school poets like Frank O'Hara and in particular John Ashbery. And I was obsessed with John Ashbery's self-portrait in a convex mirror, which is in a way an ekphrastic poem. It's about a painting, a Mannerist painting called Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror, but it's also not. It's like an incredibly long poem about everything. It's about the relationship between representation and reality. It's about New York on a summer's day in the mid-50s, well, it was written in the 70s, but yeah, I mean, when's it set? It's not clear. It's about friendship. It's about, you know, the way everything kind of bleeds together. And so the way I see ekphrasis is less in terms of aboutness, but in terms of kind of absorbency. And I'm interested, like you were saying, in the way all of our different experiences, cultural experiences, relationships kind of bleed into one another, and how much you can include in the poem, what you can absorb into it. If you can absorb the literal text that you're reading, the things that you're seeing, and not pretend that poetry has to be this kind of pure thing, which is just about this, but can be kind of open to all this other stuff. And for me, I guess what you might call a crassus is one way of doing that, of opening up the poem and making it into a more kind of absorbent space or surface.
Well, unbelievably, it's 7:44, and I'm going to have to make my concluding remark in relation to what you've just said, which is that you have, you've shown us this this enormous amount that your poetry can include and absorb and bring into itself. And we're gesturing to right and left, to films that people might watch afterwards, to Ashbury. There's so much to follow up, and it's been so terrific talking with you and listening to you. Congratulations on the book. I mean, if this were physically the size that it is conceptually, it would fill rooms. I mean, really, it's terrific. Thank you. And I think I'm going to hand over to Holly, who might tell us how to buy the book and maybe what's happening next week.
Yes, thank you, Alex, and thank you, Will. You can buy the book directly from the publisher, which is Granta Poetry. This is their first ever poetry collection, the first time they've snuck into poetry publishing in book form. So let's support them. Their link is in the chat. We will be back again next week with Martha Sprackland reading from Citadel, so don't miss that. We'll be heading off now, but what we'll do is after Alex and Will have left, I'll just mute and close off my video, so you can go to the links in the chat and look up things like those silent films that Will was mentioning earlier. Hope to see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.